It's filming now.
Oh. Yeah. uh, the primary thing to understand about the American military is that it's an extortion racket. The U.S. military, since World War II, has been entirely an offensive force. It is designed to fight in countries which were not the ones that through the Cold War we were told it was designed to fight in. For instance, 50% of the military has been designed to fight in deserts, jungles, and stuff, which the USSR never had. And so it's always been aimed at the Third World. Now, its purpose there is to compel the poorer countries on Earth to obey the will of the U.S. That is, what the U.S. wants, truthfully, is not warfare itself, it's compliance. That is, we want to be able to use the military to intimidate other countries to doing what we want them to do. And mainly what we want them to do is to help us make money, or rather to help the richest people in the U.S. make the most money possible. Reason for this is that investors in the U.S. have a whole lot of money to invest, and they have that because they have a very high rate of profit, and so they have all this loose money that if they give it back to people in the country, they won't be able to make nearly as much money from, and we would have a much better and fairer, more just and honest society than we have, but the rich wouldn't be as fabulously rich as they are, which is what they want. And so they take that money and they invest it where it will get the highest rate of return possible, which is always in countries that have the lowest wages. And so they want to be able to exploit poor countries. The result of this is that you have the poorest people on Earth making lots of money for the richest people on Earth. And the primary means by which this is accomplished now is through devaluing the currencies of poor countries around the world, so that those countries are all put on gigantic bargain basement sales, and everything in the country is sold cheaply because the currency itself is sold cheaply. For instance, in 2000, if you wanted to spend $1 in India, what you got would cost $5.26 to make in the United States on the average. Whereas if you were in India and you had 100 rupees and you bought stuff from the U.S., what you got would cost 19 rupees if it had been produced in India. So the poorer countries lose money in both directions in foreign trade. And this is what they are forced to do by the institutions of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund primarily, and secondarily the World Bank, and then also now the World Trade Organization since 1995. All of those international institutions are supposedly part of the UN, that is, they're under the UN Charter, but in such a way that no vote of the UN can affect anything that they do. So they're under that umbrella, and it's rather like disguising an elephant under a mouse, because the Bretton Woods institutions, as they're called, because they were designed in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, have many hundreds of times more money than the UN itself has, and they're insulated from inspection and from the world by their status under the UN, though they're actually far more important and powerful than the UN. And those are the institutions that that lend money to countries and then tell them that they're going to have to repay the money in dollars, and that to get the dollars, they're going to have to sell more stuff. And so the obvious way to get them to sell more stuff is to devalue the currency, because then everything in the country is cheaper. And so of course they sell more stuff, but they're getting less money for it. And so the U.S. is then systematically driving the poorer countries around the world even deeper into poverty in order to make fabulous profits for the richest people in the United States and generally in the 7 other richest countries on Earth, the G8, who get every vote that they want in the because they always keep more than 45% of the money invested in both of those institutions in their own hands. And votes are by the amount of money invested. The rules of the institutions can't be changed except by more than 85% of the vote, since the U.S. maintains 19% of the money in the IMF and the World Bank. It's incapable of being of having anything fundamental about the institutions outvoted, and so its investment counts as a veto power. Now, those are the institutions that make the rich countries act together as an imperial, a joint imperial power, and make most of the people on Earth remain in the economic status that colonies have always had. So that the colonial system after World War II was just reformulated in a new fashion as a joint empire rather than as individual and fragmented empires as it was before. Now, the role of the U.S. military in all of this is to prevent any small country from leaving that system. For instance, when Vietnam said that it wanted to use its own resources for its own purposes in order to develop its own country in its own way, and it became obvious in 1957 that 70% of North and South Vietnam wanted Ho Chi Minh for their president, then Eisenhower and later Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon all blocked that possibility because they wanted Vietnam to use its labor and resources for the benefit of the United States, not for Vietnam. And they wanted other countries to witness what we were willing to do to any country that attempted to use its own resources for itself. Same thing with Cambodia, Laos, and all the countries around the world that we have crushed and sicked our covert operation teams on and all of that. And so the real purpose is the same purpose that the mafia has when it walks into a store and says, gee, you have an awfully nice plate glass window there. It would be very horrible if something would happen to it, wouldn't it? And so don't you think you should pay me $150 each week? That's what the mafia says, and basically that's what the U.S. government and the G8 together say to all the poor countries. They say, don't you think our system is better, since after all, if you conform to our will, you won't be attacked the way that Vietnam was.
I realize we have to